Hey everyone, I'm coming back to finally finish my Astronan bag that I used the velvet scrap bags to embellish with my applique. So there's a couple of things I'm going to do in this process. One of them completely unnecessary, involving this background fabric. But the first thing that you need to do from here, once you've embellished your bag, is stitch your magnets on. So you find the center point of the bag and put the two parts of the magnets on the matching sides. I'm not going to show you that in the video, but I'll show you one I've done previously. This is the last bag I finished with the gold braid, which is, I think, just quite gorgeous. Can't get that in frame. There we go. So it's just had all that gold braid from Yazi embellished on the top there. But on the inside, you can see I've put my magnets. Now the magnets come with holes, so all I've done is a back stitch from one hole to the next as I've gone around the edges. You can't see it on the other side because the beauty of this felt is it's quite thick, so you actually don't need to come out the other side with your stitches, and you can just embed them in the actual body of the felt and have the stable magnet attached to your bag. So I'll take that one away. So I'm going to do that, and then the next thing that we need to do once that process is done is we need to take the sides and attach them to the body of the bag. Now the simplest way to do that is to grab two of the pins that are included in the kit and mark the halfway points on both sides. So that's my halfway point for the bag body. And if I come over here and do this, I can find my halfway point on the bag side. And I can align those and stitch them in. Now before I do that, I'm actually going to make a binding. So it's not necessary for you to bind your finished edges. On this one, I just stitched around the edges and left them raw, and I quite like that. And then you can see where I have had the raw edges of the braids and decorative elements. I just put a bit of ribbon over the top to cover those raw edges, but there's no reason why you need to actually braid that off. But because of the style of applique I've done, it's a relatively elegant sort of look, even though it's very raw shapes. The colours lend itself to a fairly classical finish. Plus I have these edges on the sides of the bag where I have applique that's got a raw edge. So I decided to take my maroon cotton fabric. Actually, I think this is a polycotton. It really doesn't matter for the purposes of the exercise, and turn it into a continuous bias binding. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Now I'm just going to come out a little bit with the camera. This is a 20-inch square. Now to do that, I'm going to use the 45-degree angle on my ruler. So I'm cutting this square at a 45 degree, just coming down to the corner here. So I'm going to cut from this corner across on a 45-degree angle. Turn this around so I've got a better angle for the cutting. And just extend this through, following the line. I cut the square, 20-inch square on the 45-degree angle, as I said before. 2 bias edges, 2 non-bias edges. I'm now going to flip this bias edge over to here and stitch that along that side. Press the seam open and then draw my lines of bias across the surface. So I'll go and do the stitching and I'll come right back and show you what's next. I've come back from the sewing machine and I've sewed my two pieces together on the non-bias. So on this is all bias stretch now, there's a lot of stretch. And I've marked with my favourite trusty marking pencil 2 1/4 inch strips across the piece. So you can do this any size. 2.5 was just a bit too big. 2 1/4 worked for what I needed. Now there's just this smidgen that's outside of the 2 1/4, so I'm not going to bother marking that with a pencil. I'm just going to trim that off with the rotary cutter because we don't need that. I need to change my blade, as you can see. It's obviously got a nick in it. Right, now that I've got rid of that excess, I'm going to bring these 2 marked up edges together and I'm going to stitch them so that they join up. Now I'm looking at the point where this bit intersects. Each of my various intersections should cross at about the 1/4 inch spot, and I'll pin this at the sewing machine because I want that lined up once I've done my 1/4 inch seam, and that'll bring me to the end of that bit. So I'll go and stitch this and then come back and show you the cutting. Here's my stitched piece, so you can see that the lines mostly, one's not that great, but mostly they line up. Now the next thing we do, not the pinking shears, the next thing we do is just cut along the line, and this is going to give me meters of continuous binding. Because it's cut in a funny little, now it's stitched in a funny little loop. As I cut along the lines, I'm getting this fabulous continuous binding. Now the next thing I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take it over to the ironing board and turn it into a bias binding strip like that. So I'll come back once I've made all the binding and I've ironed it in place, and we'll be at the sewing machine and I'll show you how we're putting the whole thing together. Rightio, so we're at the sewing machine. I have, as I said, ironed all of my, or cut out, and then ironed all of my bias, and you can see it's got quite a bit of stretch to it. Now, why would we go to all that fuss for bias? Firstly, when you do it the way we did it and open up your strips, the weight of the joins are spread out across the more distance. So it's not just, you don't have bulk in one place, the bulk is spread out, I guess is what I'm trying to say. The bias will allow you to go around curves easily because it's got the give, whereas if you're working on the straight grain, it's going to pull and not have the give, so you get more puckers. and you've got the opportunity to shape things the way you want them to go in your piece. Now, I've taken my second panel. I've actually already done one there, which I'll show you in more detail in a second. I've taken my second panel, I've measured the midpoint on both the side panel and the bag itself, and I've pinned them together. Now, the way I've pinned these are a little bit unusual, and you just have to be careful not to rip your hands open, but I actually want to have a significant amount of flat surface on my the bed of my sewing machine as I'm going around, particularly as I go around these corners. Put that one in a bit, because you need to just be a little bit careful going around the corners. Now, as I said before, there's no requirement to create a binding for these bags. They're not really necessarily designed for that. They look great just as is if you were to sew them, but for this one I wanted to have the binding. So my 2.5 or 2.25 inches have now come down to about 1 1/8 because I've folded it in half, and then it's going to be, what's that, 9/8, 4 1/2, just over half an inch either side as I go around the edges. So I'll just hold that in place as I stitch. Now, I've got I think this is a zipper foot. It's a foot that's got a flat base. I'm pretty sure it's a zipper foot. Can you see that in there? And I've moved my sewing machine needle as far to the left as it will go, so that it's going to be easily moving along. Now, you want to not use an open toe foot on this because you're working around these eyelets for the handbag straps. So I was getting some shifting I wasn't happy with, so I've gone through and I've popped the clips on just to hold this in place a little bit. The edge of my bias was rolling, so I've had to unpick a little bit. So anyway, back to where we were. Take 2. So you can personalise your bindings in lots of great ways. You can create all manner of interesting different design features with your bindings. You can create binding and use it as a woven element, like I did with the gold ribbons and bits and pieces. And that technique that I showed you suited a whole range of different sizes. Now, I got about 3.5 meters worth of binding out of my 20-inch square. You can go bigger, you can go smaller, you can do whatever fits and works best with what you need. So I'm going to finish stitching this and come back and show you the finished bag.